Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's video is subtracting decimals using the standard algorithm, Unit 3. Just like with the adding decimals, there's going to be many different methods they're going to teach you to subtract decimals in the book, but we're only going to focus on the standard algorithm. Okay, so again, we don't have any vocab. You're going to notice our notes are exactly the same as when we added decimals. So it's whenever you add a decimal to a number, you must add it to the end so you don't change the value of the number. So remember last night we said 38 is the same as 38 decimal. You must always add it to the end. Okay, you're going to notice our steps tonight are pretty identical as well. So we're going to add a decimal to the end if we need one. We're going to set up our problem vertically, being sure to line up your decimals. We're going to add those zeros to create kind of our box. But obviously tonight we're not going to add, we're going to subtract. Now, with subtraction comes borrowing, which sometimes throws people off. So be really careful when we subtract that you're making sure you don't skip borrowing when you need it. And then we're going to bring down the decimal using a line, just like we did before. Okay, so the steps are going to be exactly the same. The only difference in the problems are really just going to be they're going to be subtraction tonight. So hopefully we already know our steps. Notice our signs look a little weird. I put them double. Okay, step one is I'm going to add a decimal to the end if needed. Well, this one has one, but this one does not. Step two is I'm going to set up my problem vertically, making sure, whoops, I should be in red. Sorry, guys. Step two is I should set up my problem vertically, making sure I line up my decimal. Okay, step three is I'm going to add zeros to create that box shape. Step four is I'm going to subtract. So I get 6 minus 0 is 6, 2 minus 0 is 2, 4 minus 8 is not possible. So I'm going to borrow from my neighbor. That becomes a 4 and that becomes a 14. So 14 minus 8 is 6, 4 minus 2 is 2. And then step five is I'm going to bring down my decimal with a line. Okay, let's try another one. Again, my subtraction sign I made longer. Step one, I'm going to add decimals if needed. So this one doesn't have a decimal, so I'm going to add it to the end. Step two is I'm going to set up my problem vertically, making sure to line up my decimals. Step three is I'm going to add those zeros to create a box. And again, just like with the adding, I'm making sure my numbers are really lined up. Step four is I'm going to subtract. 0 take away 5 is not possible. So I come all the way here to borrow. He doesn't have anything. I have to go all the way here. This becomes a 0, and that becomes a 10. Okay, now this one can borrow from here. This one now becomes a 9, and he becomes a 10. Wow, that's a lot of borrowing. 10 take away 5 is 5. 9 take away 3 is 6. 0 take away 6, not possible. So I have to come over here and borrow. He becomes a 2, and he becomes a 10. Okay, 10 take away 6 is 4. 2 take away 0 is 2. Okay, so that was a really tricky subtraction. And then step five is I'm going to bring down my decimals with a line. Okay, let's try some of these. Okay, my first one looks like this. Okay, step one says add a decimal to the end if needed. They both have a decimal, so I'm good. Step two is set up my problem vertically, being sure to line up my decimal. Step 3 is I'm going to add zeros to create a box. Step 4 is I'm going to subtract. 5 take away 0 is 5. 2 take away 9 is impossible. So I'm going to come over here and borrow. He becomes a 3, and now he becomes a 12. So 12 take away 9 is 3. 3 take away 2 is 1. And 1 take away 0 is 1. So that's my step 4. And step 5 is I'm going to bring the decimals down with a line. Okay, so really I think the hardest part of tonight's lesson is the borrowing. Okay, let's try another one. Step 1 is I'm going to add a decimal to the end if needed. Well, the 16 doesn't have a decimal, so it needs to go to the end. Okay, step 2 is I'm going to set up my problem, being sure to line up my decimals. Okay, step 3 is I'm going to add zeros to kind of create a box and pay close attention how everything's lined up. Step 4 is I'm going to subtract. Okay, here's this hard one. 0 take away 5 cannot be done, so I'm going to have to come over here and borrow. He doesn't have any, so I'm going to have to come over here and borrow. He becomes a 5 and he becomes a 10. So now he can borrow from him. So this now becomes a 9 and this becomes a 10. So 10 take away 5 is 5. 9 take away 2 is 7. 5 take away 9 can't happen, so he needs to borrow from him. So it's 15 take away 9 is 6, and 0 take away 0 is 0. Okay, and then my final step is step 5. Okay, we're going to try 2 more. Okay, number 3. Okay, step 1 is they both have decimals, so I can skip it. Step 2 is I'm going to set up my problem vertically, being sure to line up my decimals. Step 3 is I'm going to add zeros to create a box, but I don't need to. So step 4 is I'm going to subtract. 1 take away 5 is impossible, so I'm going to borrow. Sorry, that's a 2. 11 take away 5 is 6. 2 take away 2 is 0. 2 take away 0 is 2. And then my final step is step 5, which means bring my decimals down using a line. Okay, here's our final one to try together. Okay, step 1 is they both have a decimal, so I don't have to do it. Step 2 is I'm going to set up my problem vertically, being sure to line up my decimals. Step 3 is I'm going to add zeros to create that box. Step 4 is I'm going to subtract. So 0 take away 9 can't happen, so I'm going to borrow. This becomes a 6 and that becomes a 10. So 10 take away 9 is 1. 6 take away 4 is 2. 5 take away 2 is 3. And then step 5 is I'm going to bring down my decimal using a line. Okay, so tonight you have 4 problems, and always rate yourself and be honest. Okay, good luck, and I'll see you in the morning. Good night.